August 17, 1943. Clear skies stretched over eastern Germany as Hauptmann Karl Weber guided his Messerschmitt Bf 109G through the morning air at 26,000 feet. The veteran pilot of Jagdgeschwader 26 smiled confidently as intelligence reports confirmed another American bomber formation approaching. Their predictable box formations would make for easy targets today. Weber had no way of knowing that within hours, his entire understanding of aerial warfare would be shattered beyond recognition. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how German fighter pilots discovered that American strategic bombing wasn't just a military tactic, but an overwhelming industrial statement that would transform the psychological landscape of the air war. Another day, another chance to add to our scores, Weber told his wingman, Lieutenant Hans Müller, over the radio as they climbed to intercept the incoming American bomber stream. At 27 years old, Weber had already claimed 16 victories on the Eastern Front before being transferred to defend the Reich. His confidence was well-earned through years of combat experience. The Americans still think they can daylight bomb with those flying fortresses. Let's show them why they're wrong. Müller, just 22 and with 7 kills to his credit, laughed in agreement. Those boxes they fly in are ridiculous. They make themselves perfect targets, all clustered together. 500 miles away, at an airfield in East Anglia, England, Colonel James Harrison of the 91st Bomb Group was briefing his crews for Operation Starkey, one of the largest daylight precision bombing raids yet attempted against German ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. The industrial complex produced over 40% of Germany's precision bearings, critical components for everything from tanks to aircraft engines. Gentlemen, today we're taking 376 B-17s deep into enemy territory, Harrison announced to the crowded briefing room. The 36-year-old commander had flown 12 combat missions himself and knew exactly what his men were facing. Intelligence estimates will encounter between 200 and 250 enemy fighters. We'll be flying in combat box formations, 21 bombers per box, staggered at different altitudes. Lieutenant Thomas Cooper, a 24-year-old pilot from Nebraska on his 4th mission, raised his hand. "Sir, that's a lot of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Why not spread out more to make ourselves harder to hit?" Harrison nodded at the question he'd heard many times before. "Concentration of firepower, Lieutenant. Each B-17 carries 13 50 caliber machine guns. In a tight combat box, we create overlapping fields of fire. When those Luftwaffe boys come in, they'll be facing over 250 guns per box. Multiply that by our 18 boxes, and that's over 4,500 guns in the air." Technical Sergeant William O'Malley, a 23-year-old ball turret gunner from Boston, whispered to his crewmate, "4,000 guns sound great until you're the box they decide to focus on." Back in German airspace, Jagdgruppe Commander Major Ernst Bormann received the radar reports at Group headquarters. The 39-year-old veteran had flown since the Spanish Civil War and had seen the Luftwaffe at its peak during the Blitzkrieg years. Now he was witnessing its gradual erosion. The Americans are coming in with approximately 350 aircraft, heading directly for Schweinfurt, the radar operator reported. They appear to be flying in their usual formation patterns. Bormann nodded, studying the situation map. "We have 173 interceptors available today. Notify all units to prepare for staggered attacks. Priority is the lead bomber elements." The German air defense system had become highly efficient by 1943. Within minutes, fighters from 5 different Jagdgeschwader units were vectored toward the incoming American formation, including Weber and Müller's squadron. At the same time, in the lead B-17F Carolina Princess, and Bombardier Lieutenant David Goldstein was checking his Norden bomb sight calibration. The precision instrument cost $25, the equivalent of 5 houses back home, and was said to be able to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20 Zoran feet. "How much longer until we reach the German border?" Goldstein asked his pilot, Captain Robert Sullivan. "About 20 minutes, Sullivan replied, checking his watch against the mission timetable. That's when the real fun begins. The bomber stream stretched nearly 20 miles from lead to tail element. Each B-17F Flying Fortress weighed 700 pounds empty, carried a crew of 10 men, and could deliver 6,000 pounds of bombs over targets 800 miles from base. American factories were now producing them at a rate of 1 aircraft every 90 minutes, an industrial output that the German High Command had grossly underestimated. In the cockpit of his Bf-109, Weber received the vector coordinates from ground control. Bandits at 12 o'clock high, range 40 kilometers, approximately 300-plus aircraft in multiple box formations. "I see them," Muller responded. "Look at that, they're still flying those ridiculous tight boxes." The German pilots had been briefed extensively on American formation tactics. The B-17s flew in boxes of 21 aircraft, arranged in 3 elements of 7 aircraft each, staggered at different altitudes. The Germans initially thought this was a tactical error. Clustering valuable bombers together created a target-rich environment for their fighters. What they didn't fully appreciate was that this formation transformed each bomber group into a flying fortress of overlapping defensive firepower, creating a nearly impenetrable wall of lead for any attacking fighter. As Weber led his section of 6 Bf-109s toward the bomber formation, he instructed his pilots, "Remember the briefing? Attack from the front quarter, roll away to the right after firing. The Americans have fewer guns facing forward." The German strategy had evolved through bitter experience. Frontal attacks, while still dangerous, offered the best chance against the American formations. Each B-17 had fewer guns pointing forward, and a successful head-on pass could potentially knock out the pilots or bombardier, rendering the aircraft combat ineffective. In the lead bomber, Captain Sullivan spotted the incoming fighters. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, multiple 109s coming in." Throughout the formation, bomber crews readied themselves. In his ball turret position beneath Carolina Princess, Sergeant Frank Mahoney swung his twin 50-caliber guns toward the approaching threat. The spherical turret was a marvel of engineering, allowing a gunner to track targets in almost any direction beneath the aircraft, but was also a claustrophobic nightmare that forced the operator to sit in a fetal position for hours. "I've got 6 109s coming in 12 high," Mahoney called over the interphone. In the bomber 3 positions behind Sullivan's aircraft, Lieutenant Cooper tightened his grip on the controls of Nebraska Avenger. This would be his baptism by fighter attack, and despite months of training, nothing could truly prepare a crew for their first combat engagement. "Steady, boys," Cooper called to his crew. "Remember your fields of fire. Don't shoot until they're in range." Weber led his fighters in a steep dive toward the lead box of B-17s, planning to pull up an attack from below and front, a maneuver that had worked well in previous engagements. At 26,000 feet, the air was thin and bitterly cold, with outside temperatures reaching minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside his cockpit, Weber's breath condensed, despite the electrical heating in his flight suit. "Follow me in," he ordered. "Target the lead aircraft first." What happened next would forever change Weber's understanding of modern air warfare. As the 6 German fighters approached attack position, the skies erupted with a storm of tracers unlike anything they had previously encountered. The box formation that had seemed so vulnerable suddenly transformed into an interlocking web of defensive fire. "Mein Gott!" Müller exclaimed as thousands of rounds filled the air around them. The Americans had positioned their bombers specifically to create overlapping fields of fire. meaning any attacking fighter would face not just the guns of their target, but those of multiple surrounding bombers as well. Weber pushed through, focusing on the lead bomber. His Bf-109's 20mm cannons fired, sending shells toward the American aircraft. A few hits sparked off the bomber's aluminum skin, but the heavily armored B-17 continued flying steadily. As Weber flashed past the formation, rolling right as planned, his aircraft shuddered violently. Multiple .50-caliber rounds from the bomber's defensive guns had found their mark. One shattered his canopy, another punctured his radiator, and several more tore through his right wing. "I'm hit!" he called, fighting to maintain control of his damaged aircraft. Looking back, he saw one of his squadron mates trailing smoke, another spiraling downward with a damaged engine. Of the 6 fighters that had made the initial attack, only 4 remained combat effective. On the American side, the bomber crews worked with practiced precision. In Carolina Princess, tail gunner Staff Sergeant James Wilson tracked the passing German fighters. "Got one. Damaged engine. Trailing glycol." The interphone erupted with reports from different positions as the bomber continued on its course, maintaining tight formation despite the attack. 2 aircraft in the formation had taken damage, but none had been shot down in the initial German pass. Major Bormann, monitoring the engagement from headquarters, received the first reports of the encounter. Squadron 3 reports heavy defensive fire. 2 aircraft damaged, 1 pilot wounded. They claim 3 bombers damaged. Bormann frowned. The exchange rate was not favorable. American industrial might meant they could afford to lose bombers at a far greater rate than the Luftwaffe could lose trained pilots. Every German pilot represented months of increasingly scarce training resources, aviation fuel, and irreplaceable experience. For the American bomber crews, the German fighter attacks were terrifying, but expected. They had been thoroughly briefed on what to anticipate and how to respond. What the German pilots couldn't see was the psychological cost of these missions. Inside each B-17, young men, most barely out of their teens, faced mortality for 8 to 10 hours straight, flying through flak and fighter attacks while enduring extreme cold, oxygen deprivation, and the constant fear of mechanical failure over enemy territory. Lieutenant Cooper's aircraft took several hits during the second wave of attacks. A 20mm shell exploded near the radio compartment, wounding his radio operator, yet the formation discipline held. Breaking formation meant certain death, as isolated bombers became easy prey for the German fighters. "Stay tight on Sullivan's wing," Cooper instructed his co-pilot, Lieutenant Fred Barnes. "No matter what happens, we maintain formation." As the bomber stream approached Schweinfurt, the full weight of German air defenses came to bear. Additional fighter groups joined the attack, including a squadron of FW-190s led by Hauptmann Otto Kittel, a rising ace with over 100 Eastern Front victories. Kittel studied the American formation with grudging respect. "Look at that. They're still holding tight despite everything we're throwing at them." His wingman, Oberleutnant Franz Schall, nodded. "Their formation discipline is impressive, but it makes them predictable." What wasn't predictable was the sheer volume of defensive fire. As Kittel led his fighters in from the 3 o'clock high position, the sky filled with a wall of tracers more dense than any they had previously encountered. "Break off! Too much fire!" Kittel ordered as his fighters scattered to avoid the concentrated defensive barrage. 3 of his 12 fighters took critical damage in the single pass, with 1 pilot forced to bail out. In Weber's damaged Bf-109, systems were failing rapidly. Coolant temperature was rising dangerously as glycol leaked from his radiator. "I need to return to base," he radioed to his squadron leader. "Engine temperature critical." As he turned away from the bomber stream, Weber witnessed the arrival of the second wave of German interceptors. The radio chatter indicated growing frustration among the German pilots. The dense formations of B-17s were proving incredibly resilient to their attacks, while exacting a heavy toll on the interceptors. Colonel Harrison, in the command aircraft near the middle of the formation, monitored the battle's progress. Box 3 reports 2 aircraft with damage, 1 crew member wounded. Box 6 has lost 1 aircraft, 2 others damaged, but maintaining formation. The losses were significant but sustainable, precisely what the American planners had calculated. The mathematical equation of air warfare had been coldly calculated. If each box of 21 bombers lost 3 aircraft but destroyed the target, the mission was considered a success. American industry could replace those losses faster than the Germans could rebuild their factories. For Weber, limping back to base with a damaged fighter, this industrial reality was becoming painfully clear. In training, Luftwaffe pilots had been taught that superior German skill and tactics would overcome American numerical advantages. The reality in the air told a different story. When Weber landed at his home airfield near Frankfurt, he was immediately taken to the debriefing room. 8 other pilots from his group had returned with damaged aircraft. 4 hadn't returned at all. "They're sending up more bombers than we have fighters to intercept them," one pilot complained during debriefing. "And each bomber has more guns than 10 of our fighters combined." The intelligence officer leading the session, Major Heinrich Vogler, nodded grimly. "American aircraft production has reached over 800 units per month. The Schweinfurt raid today involved nearly 400 bombers. Our entire fighter strength on the Western Front is only 800 aircraft." The numbers stunned the room into silence. Weber, his flight suit still stained with blood from a minor shrapnel wound, understood the implications immediately. "They can afford to lose 50 bombers per mission and still come out ahead," Vogler continued. "Their industrial capacity is simply overwhelming our defenses. Each bomber represents approximately 18,000 man-hours of production. They're building them faster than we can shoot them down." Meanwhile, the American bomber formation had reached Schweinfurt. Despite fierce opposition, 282 of the original 376 aircraft arrived over the target area, a success rate that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Lieutenant Goldstein and the other bombardiers synchronized their Norden bomb sights as the formations began their bomb runs. "Bombs away!" Goldstein called as Carolina Princess released its payload. Across the formation, over 700 tons of high explosives rained down on the ball-bearing works. The results were devastating. Intelligence analysis would later confirm that production capacity at Schweinfurt was reduced by over 60%, creating critical shortages throughout the German military supply chain. Each ball-bearing factory required precision machinery that took months to replace, time the German war effort no longer had. As the bomber formations turned toward England, they faced additional fighter attacks from fresh German squadrons. The battle continued for another hour, with the Americans losing 27 more aircraft before reaching the relative safety of the English Channel. At his base, Weber sat in the officers' mess, a glass of schnapps untouched before him. The day's combat reports were filtering in, painting a grim picture. The Luftwaffe had lost 65 fighters and 43 pilots killed or seriously wounded. The Americans had lost 60 bombers, each carrying 10 men, but had delivered a devastating blow to German industrial capacity. "The mathematics simply don't work in our favor," Weber said quietly to Müller, who had returned safely after scoring a single bomber kill. "We're outnumbered, and their formations are far more effective than we initially thought." Müller, his youthful confidence somewhat diminished, nodded. "Those boxes weren't designed by fools. Each bomber protects the others. It's like attacking a hedgehog. No matter which direction you come from, you face the spines." Major Bormann joined them, sitting heavily in a wooden chair. "The Reichsmarschall is demanding better results," he said, referring to Hermann Göring, the increasingly erratic head of the Luftwaffe. "He believes our pilots lack aggressiveness." Weber snorted derisively. "Tell him to come fly a mission himself. See how aggressive he feels, flying into a 1,000-gun formation. The psychological impact on the German pilots was profound. In earlier years of the war, Luftwaffe pilots had enjoyed technological parity or superiority, numerical advantages, and the initiative in most engagements. Now they faced an enemy whose industrial might had transformed the battlefield entirely. In his diary that night, Weber wrote, "Today I saw the future of this war, and it wears an American uniform. Their bombers come not as individual aircraft, but as flying fortresses of steel, each protecting the other. But more than this, they come as a statement of industrial power. For every one we shoot down, 3 more appear the next day. How long can we sustain this uneven exchange?" At the American base in East Anglia, the returning crews were debriefed as medical teams treated the wounded. Lieutenant Cooper's Nebraska Avenger had returned with over 30 flak and bullet holes, a wounded radio operator, and a damaged right aileron, but had completed its mission. "You did well today," Colonel Harrison told the assembled crews after the debriefing. "The target was hit successfully. Reconnaissance will confirm damage assessment tomorrow. But preliminary reports suggest we've dealt a serious blow to German production. The human cost had been significant. 60 bombers lost meant 600 men, of whom perhaps a third might survive as prisoners of war. The remainder were either killed in action or lost in the freezing waters of the North Sea." Lieutenant Thomas Cooper sat alone after the debriefing, writing letters to the families of 2 crewmen from another bomber in his squadron who had been killed when their aircraft went down. Despite his exhaustion, he felt a quiet pride in what they had accomplished. The box formations, which had seemed so vulnerable in theory, had proven their worth in combat. 3 days later, reconnaissance photographs confirmed the extensive damage to the Schweinfurt factories. The ball-bearing works were heavily cratered, with multiple production halls destroyed and transportation links severed. German production would be hampered for months. For Hauptmann Weber, the implications were becoming clearer with each mission. The following week, during another interception attempt against American bombers targeting aircraft factories near Leipzig, he witnessed the arrival of P-47 Thunderbolt fighters escorting the bombers. These long-range American fighters, carrying drop tanks that extended their range, now meant the bombers had protection for the entire mission. "They've solved the escort problem," Weber told his squadron mates afterward. "Now they have fighters that can reach Berlin." The American production figures continued to astonish the German pilots. In a single month, American factories produced more P-47 fighters than Germany manufactured Bf-109s in 3 months. The P-51 Mustang, which began appearing in early 1944, was being produced at a rate of over 700 per month, more than Germany's entire fighter production across all types. By February 1944, Weber's combat diary reflected the changing reality. "Intercepted an American formation today. Their escort fighters outnumbered us 3-1. The bombers flew in the same formations, but now they have a protective screen of Mustangs and Thunderbolts. We lost 11 aircraft and shot down only 3 bombers and 2 fighters. The simple truth is becoming unavoidable. We cannot win this battle of attrition." The psychological impact of American industrial might manifested in numerous ways. German pilots began reporting more mechanical issues, sometimes returning from missions without engaging the enemy. Training hours were cut as fuel shortages became critical, meaning new pilots entered combat with less preparation than their predecessors. On the American side, the heavy bomber offensive continued to grow in scale and effectiveness. By April 1944, missions involving over 1,000 bombers were becoming common, overwhelming German air defenses through sheer numerical superiority. Weber survived until March 1944, when his aircraft was shot down by a P-51 Mustang near Frankfurt. He bailed out successfully, but suffered injuries that removed him from combat operations. From his hospital bed, he wrote to Müller, who was still flying, "The Americans have won the production war, which means they will win the air war. Their box formations that we once mocked have become the symbol of their victory, not through tactical brilliance, but through the overwhelming firepower that only massive industrial capacity can provide." Müller never received the letter. He was killed 2 days before it would have arrived, shot down while attempting to intercept American bombers over Berlin. Of the 12 pilots who had been in Weber's original squadron in August 1943, only 2 survived until the end of the war. The American strategic bombing campaign continued to grow in intensity. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceded air superiority over most of Europe. The production disparity had become insurmountable. In 1944 alone, American factories produced over 38 Zauserzern aircraft, while German production, despite remarkable efforts by Albert Speer to increase output, managed only 39 807 aircraft for the entire war from 1939 to 1945. Colonel Harrison, who survived the war and retired as a brigadier general, later wrote in his memoirs, "The box formation was never a tactical masterpiece. It was simply the most efficient way to concentrate our defensive firepower while still maintaining bombing accuracy. What made it effective was the industrial might behind it, the ability to put thousands of aircraft into the air simultaneously, each bristling with guns, creating an overwhelming volume of fire that no defender could match indefinitely." Lieutenant Cooper completed 25 missions and returned to Nebraska, where he occasionally gave talks to school children about his experiences. "The Germans were brave and skilled fighters," he would tell them, "but we had something they couldn't match: factories. American workers built so many bombers that we could afford to lose hundreds and still keep coming. That's what won the air war, American production lines running day and night, building more planes than the Germans could ever shoot down." In his final letter home before being shot down, Lieutenant Müller wrote words that captured the psychological impact of facing American industrial might. "We no longer fear their tactics or even their skill. What terrifies us is their endless supply. Their box formations keep coming, day after day, each box protecting the others with 1,000 machine guns. And behind each formation lost, 3 more appear the next day. How does one fight the entire industrial output of a continent? It is like trying to empty the ocean with a drinking cup." The American bomber offensive ultimately dropped over 1.5 million tons of bombs on German targets, using 46 500 aircraft sorties. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force in the world, was ground down through a war of attrition it could never hope to win. For Hauptmann Karl Weber, who survived the war and later became a commercial pilot in the revived German airline industry, the lesson was clear. When asked by a historian in 1965 about the effectiveness of American bombing formations, he replied, "The Americans turned industrial production into a weapon more powerful than any single aircraft. Their box formations weren't just tactical units. They were flying advertisements for factories we could never match. Each formation carried not just bombs, but a message: we can build these faster than you can shoot them down." Once we understood that message, we knew the war was lost. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.